Hello, and welcome to The Laughing Tree. We are continuing today our series of campaign prep episodes in advance of the launch of Blades and Banners, coming hopefully in November of this year. So today I want to give a little bit of a deeper dive into the Lhazaar Principalities, which will be the main setting of this campaign, both for your benefit as viewers and for the benefit of my players who are in the process of designing characters right now and asked for a bit more detail into the setting. So without further ado, here we go. So the thing you need to understand first and foremost about the Lhazaar Principalities is that it is a land of chaotic meritocracy. Every single pirate lord rules his or her own island or strip of coastline, um, but these pirate princes rule by acclamation of their powerful subjects, their captains, and the larger, stronger subjects. It's not quite democracy in most places, although in some places it is almost democratic. But much like Caribbean piracy in the real world, Lhazaar piracy, the office of High Prince, the office of Prince are not hereditary. If a title passes from a parent to a child, it is because the new ruler already had support and not because of any sort of hereditary right. So, how did things come to be this way? Before humans came, the islands off the eastern coast of Corvair were mostly uninhabited. There were free roaming elementals, there were some fae haunting the rocky forested isles. But several centuries before humans arrived, a group of elves fleeing Arenal settled in the northernmost islands. They were there when the humans arrived, but would say little about their past. 3,000 years ago, a fleet of ships crewed by humans arrived on the eastern coast of Corvair. Many stories are told of their voyage and its motives, but what is known is they came from Sarlona, led by an adventurous captain named Lhazaar. She and her people settled among the numerous uninhabited islands, and over many generations their descendants spread to the mainland until there were human settlements across most of the continent. Just over 1,000 years ago, King Galifar began his conquests, which would eventually unite the human kingdoms of Corvair into the mighty Kingdom of Galifar, which would last for 900 years. In the 26th year of his conquests, Galifar I brought his navy against the islands of the east, beginning a 10-year struggle that would redefine the islanders' lives and help to develop the tradition of piracy that would later define them. Official Galifar histories, of course, refer to this as a pacification war. The Lhazaar princes, however, point to the fact that Galifar's victory was not complete enough to remove the autonomy of the princes. Nevertheless, under Galifar, the energies of the islanders largely went into trade and exploration, though there were some who never gave up their piratical ways during the long years of the kingdom. When the century-long succession conflict known as the Last War began, the Lhazaar princes remained neutral. Gradually, however, they were drawn in as one kingdom or another hired them out as privateers. Press-ganged sailors from the warring nations deserted and fled to the principalities, swelling the ranks of expert marines and wartime sailors. Sometimes whole crews mutinied and fled with state-of-the-art warships. The effect of this was that over the course of the war, the military power represented by the Lhazaar fleets increased, even as the ability of the Galifar fleets to deal with them decreased, as their ships and sailors were spent in the war. A few decades into the war, a dwarf called Horjet the Black took control of the island of Stonespur and began battering the other princes into submission at the helm of a massive ironclad warship called Indomitable. He seized the title of High Prince, previously held by a Galifar appointee, after unifying the islands as far south as Thrug into the Iron Tide Principality. Horjet pummeled the princes into a rough unity that allowed them to strike the shipping all around Corvair and throughout the Lhazaar Sea. Horjet took a cut of all plunder, as well as protection money from the warring nations. But such rough dealings breed grudges, and Horjet was not in short supply of enemies. In 980 YK, Indomitable suffered a catastrophic accident and burst into flame. Some said mutiny, some said sabotage, some said the ship was piloted by a bound fiend which broke free. Only a few of the crew escaped, and no one saw what became of Horjet. Immediately after, the captains of the Iron Tide fleet went to war with one another. Good sailing, clever negotiation, and convenient death of several rivals allowed Prince Rhaegar of Greentarn to rise to the top of the heap, and within a few years his Sea Dragon Principality was dominant in the region, though not all princes accepted his claim as High Prince. When the war finally came to an end, however, it was Prince Rhaegar who secured a seat for the principalities at the Thronehold Conference. And where Rhaegar, now styling himself Rhaegar Irwinarn in a bold claim to royal blood, was recognized by the other nations of Corvair as High Prince of the Lhazaar Principalities. While some holdouts remain today, the support of other nations and a growing war weariness causes most of the other Lhazaar captains to yield and accept Rhaegar. While Rhaegar claims to have been High Prince since 985 YK, it is the Treaty of Thronehold in 996 YK that put most resistance to rest. Rhaegar has now been High Prince for 7 years, 20 according to him. Now in his 50s, Rhaegar is still hale, though he has been High Prince long enough that some of his rivals are starting to wonder if he has gone soft. Rhaegar allows shipping interests to fly his flag in exchange for a fee, and thus to sail the Lhazaar Isles untroubled by other pirates. Rhaegar fiercely defends the honor of his flag against any prince who tests this. Beyond this, though, he allows the princes to run their affairs as they see fit, including tolerating a modicum of piracy. The dragon-marked houses have little presence in the principalities, with a few exceptions. House Orion has several shipping hubs here, including one for its teleportation circle network, and many princes make good coin moving goods for the house. House Kandaric operates the Dreadhold prison reluctantly, but faithfully, and House Thorani has its headquarters on the island of Regalport, ever since Horjet the Black invited them following the Shadow Schism of 972, which saw Thorani break away from House Fjarlin. What arrangement was made between Baron Elar de Thorani and Horjet is unclear, as is what current arrangement exists between the house and the Prince Rhaegar. House Lyrindar has some presence at Port Verge in the Direshark Principality, and the construction of an airship port has begun there over the objections of many other princes. Since their expulsion from Carnath, the Order of the Emerald Claw has operated extensively in the principalities. They are known to have a substantial presence among the seeker community on Port Verge. High Prince Rhaegar's most significant rivals are Prince Micah Rockface and her Cloud Reavers, predominantly dwarves, orcs, and half-orcs. Along with her original followers, Micah has gathered many who oppose Rhaegar's goal to move the principalities away from the chaotic ways of the past and toward a more unified political future. Another major rival is Prince Colberton of the Direshark Principality. Colberton is a changeling, but lives primarily as a human male, ruling the second largest town in the principalities, Port Verge. His arrangements with the Emerald Claw and House Lyrindar have garnered substantial wealth and powerful allies. While there is no open hostility between Colberton and Rhaegar, the nearer they come to a parity of strength, the more likely confrontation appears. Colberton's arrangements with Lyrindar draw attention to another principality, the Wind Whisperers. They are led by a renegade Lyrindar captain called Colton Brightwind, and they operate a stolen elemental airship. While the Wind Whisperers do not represent a direct threat to Rhaegar, they do make negotiations with the houses more awkward. In addition to rivals and threats, there are simple outliers, those who stand apart from wider Lhazaar society for their own reasons. The Bloodsails are descendants of elves who fled to the northern isles before humans even reached the region. As the power of the islanders grew, the elves formed themselves into a principality to secure their autonomy. Few ever visit the Isle of Farlnen, and dark tales are told of the elves. The Bloodsails are necromancers who sail haunted ships with spirits of former crew bound to them, and zombie sharks follow in their wake. The Grey Tide is both a principality and a strange magical phenomenon. Beyond the eastern isles of Crag and Last Point, the sea seems to steam with a strange mist that disorients pilots. Some claim the changelings of Grey Tide Principality are immune to the effect and hide a massive fleet out in the mist. Whether this is true or not, Prince Kell spends their time less in piracy or trade than in ensuring that Last Point is a safe haven for changelings who wish to live as changelings. The gnomes of Lorgalen are descendants of dissidents from Zalargo, those whose families refused to live under the supposedly benign tyranny of the Trust. The island they settled on sits on a manifest zone to Lamania and is filled with wild elementals, megafauna, and other dangers, which had previously prevented any attempt at settlement. The Zil exiles, however, befriended the elements through the art of stone singing, a form of primal magic allowing them to commune directly with elemental spirits rather than binding them to their will, as is more common in the magecraft of other nations. Though their ships are few, the Lorgali fleet is accompanied by water elementals, and their sails are driven by strong winds that seem to blow whatever direction the Stone Singer pilots wish. Their young prince, Shasi Stormlin, has been pressing for a more active role in the principalities. But with the more democratic style of government on Lorgalen, it is yet to see what fruit that will bear. So that's a quick overview of some of the most significant factions and a little bit of the history of the principalities. So, what kind of story do you tell in the principalities? You certainly can just tell a pirate swashbuckling story, and I assure you, buckles will be swashed in our story. But I think it's a little more interesting, as Eberron tends to be, than the traditional fantasy approach. As the last war gets further away, our adventure will start in about 1005. So the last war has not been actively going for more than 10 years at this point, and has been officially over for 9. And as the war gets further into the past, the nations of Corvair become presumably more confident, more certain that it isn't going to reignite. Does that make them more willing to try to suppress the piratical tendencies of the Lhazaar Principalities? As Ryger Irwinarn presses his agenda of unifying the principalities under his rule, does that push those who resist towards more and more open forms of opposition? As the houses increase in wealth and power and are more able to play the nations of what was once the kingdom of Galifar off one another, do they gain a freer hand in attempting to deal with the pirates of the Lhazaar Principalities their own way? And what about the pirate lords who have tried to adopt the ways of peace and become explorers and merchants again rather than corsairs and raiders? There's intrigue plenty in the Lhazaar Principalities. What is the Grey Tide up to? What are the dark secrets of the Isle of Farlnen and the Blood Sails? In addition to just more mundane political intrigue of the rivalry between Micah Rockface and Rygar Irwinarn, or the rise of Prince Colberton. So there's a lot to play with here. What we are going to look at, what my players have said they're excited about, is the combination of swashbuckling and factional rivalry. So our players are going to be joining a faction that they are creating, their own principality, and they will be the crew of a ship in service to that principality, attempting to help their principality rise in power and prosperity and prestige. Look at that alliteration. And I'll do some introducing of their principality in another video, and what I'm going to use for faction rules and for ship rules and for all of that stuff in a more mechanics focused episode. But I wanted this one to just sort of set the stage, help you to see what we're going to be looking at as important, and give you a bit of a picture of the aspects of the principalities that are appealing to us so far as we begin to develop this story. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, useful, or maybe some combination of both. We'll be back next week with another campaign prep episode, probably dealing with factions or some of the house rules that I am looking at using in this campaign. Now that we've had a cast conversation, and I can be a little more straightforward about these sorts of things. As I mentioned before, our hope is to start dropping episodes in November. And until then, thanks for rolling with us.